Real Religion. This is Joseph Birch. I'm speaking again with James Johnson. He was here for an interview recently. It was the last interview that I posted. And he is an atheist. How are you doing, James?
I'm doing well. And yourself, Joseph?
Very well, thank you. So,
Thank you for having
of
thank you for
course,
having me back.
of course, thank you for your time. So, as we said, you've been an atheist. I think you said since about 11, maybe 12.
Yeah, I'd say around there.
All right. And before that, your parents took you to church. I think you said they were different denominations, so you kind of switched between a couple different types of churches for a while, and then, like you said, about the age of 11 or 12, you had the thought that you didn't really, I guess, see the logic in faith. Is that fair to say? Or
Well, to clarify, initially, I only went to two churches. My parents were different um, denominations of Christianity, but
right?
we weren't switching between church. We were every Sunday. I went to either the Baptists that my dad went to, or the Catholic that my mom went to, and we all went as a family, and we always switched off week to week. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
All right. So you would all just alternate together between two.
Correct.
Okay. Um, did you notice did they seem really different to you, or were you not really paying that much attention to those kind of details?
I was definitely paying attention, and they were different. Um, there was obviously mostly similarities, except in the um, presentation, and um, I guess I can't say for sure that I could have pointed to things that they disagreed on. I think,
Mm-hmm.
and I was really young, so I can't say any of this for 100% certain with
Right.
100% certainty. I think that any disparities between their belief systems, whenever an aspect of, let's say, the Baptist Church's belief system would be presented to me, it would be presented as fact. So it
Right.
wasn't as if there was disagreement to be had, and I almost am certain, although I can't recall feeling this way, or I can't pinpoint any, but I feel almost certain that I was told different things at different um, churches.
Right.
And I remember the Catholic Church was more doctrine based, where for the Sunday school, the hour after church that we would stay, or it was before church at some age times and after church at some age times. And Baptist church would do the same thing after church. And I do remember that the Catholic was more about, we're going to memorize these 10 Commandments, we're going to memorize these things, these prayers, where the Baptist was more, let's tell a story and talk about what we're supposed to get out of the story. And I remember more so, I remember feeling about certain stories in the Baptists when I was little, thinking that these don't make any sense. And I remember, not a specific situation, but I remember feeling like there's no way that's true. And I went to a private school until ninth grade, and when I say private, it was a small town, so it wasn't like a hoity-toity thing. But it was a private school. It was probably a little bit more liberal, although there were, and by liberal, I'm not talking about political necessarily. I'm talking about artsy.
Okay.
And I remember feeling like I'm being told certain things in school that are different from, not so much that I'm comparing the two externally. Let me see how to put this. And I'm making this up. This isn't exact example, but I do remember specifically feeling that that doesn't make any sense about the ark and Noah's Ark.
Mm-hmm.
I also remember feeling that Moses, whenever I heard magic, I remember feeling like, I'm painting this as if I remember. I don't remember 100%, but I do recall the feeling about certain magical episodes that didn't make any sense. I've never seen that happen. It wasn't that I always felt this way. It was a slow realization. That's not the world I understand. And there were things I was being taught in school that didn't comport with what was being taught. And this was mostly the Baptists, because the Catholic tried to stick with doctrine, from what I recall. We're going to memorize Our Father. We're going to memorize the prayer about Mary. We're going to memorize the Ten Commandments. We're going to that kind of thing.
Right.
And so it wasn't as challengeable. Boring, maybe. I like the idea of telling stories and trying to get a meaning out of it. My mom double majored in literature and theater, so finding meaning in things was in literature was a common thread when we were kids. So I like that aspect of it, but the idea of, and I don't know this, but in my mind, currently now, I view it as, and I think psychological studies support the idea that children up to a certain age have difficulty differentiating fantasy from reality. If you tell it up until the age of, I think it's 8, if you tell a child that there's an invisible person in the room watching them, and you leave them in there with something to eat on the table and tell them not to eat it, they are less likely to eat it before the age of 8 because there's an invisible person in the room than after the age of 8. And it's around that time, and it's not 100% of the kids. At a certain point, the differentiation between reality and fiction becomes more apparent to children. And I would imagine that that's probably what happened, and I'm not trying to denigrate the belief necessarily, but the idea of turning a staff into a snake, or turning water into wine, or making one fish and bread populate, walking on water, and those repopulating the earth with 2 of each species, only having 2 humans to begin with, a snake that talked, all these little tiny moments where a kid's brain goes, that's not the world I know, versus previously where it's a story and you just kind of take it for what you're told. That is the feeling I had that ultimately led me to question. That was the feeling that evolved into more questions, practical questions. And I vaguely recall having a discussion in the Baptist after a church thing, where I don't remember what was said or the specific story. It could have been David in the lion's den or something else. I just know that that's catching my mind, where I was asking questions and just kind of not being given answers. Not that I was being told I was wrong, but more so that my questions were being ignored. Well, how did this happen? Well, let's just focus on the story. Well, why? I don't understand that kind of stuff, and that wasn't. Yeah, and again, I gotta say that all this was when I was a little kid, so I'm not remembering specifics. I'm just trying to paint a generalized picture of what I recall.
Sure. So one of the things that you mentioned just a minute ago was the fact that the approach, particularly with the Baptist, was presenting a story and trying to get a meaning out of it, and that's something that appeals to you in terms of literature and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So would you say that stories from religion can still be useful as literature, like to derive meaning from them just as stories?
I think we talked about this in the last discussion, and my answer to that is absolutely. I think that treating it as unquestioned, it's not. The answer to that question is absolutely 100%. It's the treatment of it as absolute truth, or the idea that the meaning derived from it is known to be the meaning that's intended. For example, if you knew if a piece of work is meant to be metaphoric, I mean, it's almost impossible to have a story that's not at least partly metaphoric. But if you talked with the best professors in the world, literature professors, about what a particular story meant, almost every single one of them is going to disagree at least partly. And if the author came out and said, all of you are wrong, it's actually about X, okay, that doesn't change the fact that to all these professors, when they read it and when they try to interpret it, they get these different meanings. That affects their lives, it affects the lives of their family, and not just them, all the other people that have ever read this particular book throughout their lives. It's treating your particular meaning as the absolute truth that is the issue. Interpretation and finding meaning and in works of art is a beautiful thing. Works of literature, excuse me, is a beautiful thing, but it only works when there's an understanding that nobody can have absolute certainty of not necessarily about what it means, and even the author can't have absolute certainty. There's subconscious things that play into it. There's serendipity where certain things end up interconnecting, and the author may not even be aware of it. Did you notice, author, that this particular character you've got who ends up dying of a coughing fit has 4 different people cough with him in the room throughout the book? No, I didn't. I didn't notice that. It was a total coincidence that happened. Could have some meaning. I may be going off on tangents, and I apologize.
No. So, speaking then of literature, you have mentioned to me after we did our last interview, you have a YouTube channel where you are, I believe you're known on YouTube as JamesofThrones, and the purpose of that channel, you said, is to discuss the show Game of Thrones, and I've actually heard good things about the channel from other people. I have yet to check it out, but you mentioned that to me, and the reason that I bring it up is, first of all, listeners might want to take a look at it, but secondly, after our last interview, you told me about that, and you talked about a way that it kind of related to our subject matter here, and I don't know if you remember all of what you said, but I'd like to ask you to expound on that if you can.
I don't recall a specific context. Can you give any more context to that?
You were talking about some of the a certain prediction that you had for like a theme that was going to emerge that could be seen as relating to religion and the idea of a deity and of free will.
I recall. So if anybody wants to check out that YouTube channel, I would love to have you watch it. The last 2 books have not been written of what is supposed to be 7-book series, and the last 2 seasons of the television show adapted from the books have not been written. So we don't know how it will end. So my mom and I have read the books and that are written, and have seen the television show that have been aired, and talk about what might happen and what things mean. What I'm about to say is a prediction about where the books are going to end, and I want to preface this by saying I don't know if this is true, and that our channel is not dedicated to getting it right. We're happy when we get it right, but it's mainly to the exercise, the mental exercise of trying to figure out the foreshadowing and the things that are happening. So in addition to that, this may be a spoiler. If you plan on reading them or watching them, I'm not suggesting that you hear this, but know that what I'm about to say is not anything that is based in it's based on what has the foreshadowing, but what I'm about to say has not happened in the books and may not. Okay, so in my opinion, the point Oh, first of all, Joseph, thank you so much for mentioning the channel. I appreciate that. All right, so here's where I'm getting at. What I'm getting at. If a creature, a thing, a person, came to you and gave you a choice, and you knew that this was a genuine choice that you could choose, what would you choose if they offered you immortality at peace? No hunger, no thirst, no anger, no hatred, no fear, no lust, no pain. And you'd be connected to all the other people that chose the same. Immortality at peace, connected to all the others that chose the same. But you'd have to give up free will. Would you take it? I think that most people would say no, but I think that the people who would say yes would disagree with that. But presuming that your answer is no, what if this creature or being, person, said, if you're not with us, you're in our way. You are going to detriment this perfect world which I'm trying to create. If you're not with us, you're against us. Does that change your opinion? If basically this person has a gun to your head and said, if you're not with us, you're against us, does that change what you choose? And I think most people who said no would now respond with F no. And the point of these books, in my opinion, is to put us in a position where we see the horrors that mankind does to itself. Rape, murder, theft, pestilence, greed, war, all the horrors that mankind does to itself result in having everybody lost, half the people they know. Disease rampant, no food left, snow as high as ever come down on the earth. And they're going to fight a war against what they perceive to be an unstoppable force. And when they get there, knowing that they're basically doomed, but they have to fight to survive, the other force comes out and says, I'm offering, I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourselves. You're the reason that you're suffering. If you join me, I will give you immortality at peace, connected to all the other people. All you have to do is give up free will. That, in my opinion, is what the books are leading to. But it is a metaphor for government, because you have to give up free will in order to have protections from the government. But the question becomes, how much are you willing to give up? The classic dichotomy of government is free will versus security. All right, we're going to outlaw rape. Duh. Ironically, that's not one of the 10 Commandments. We're going to outlaw theft. Well, what if you're dying of starvation? Okay, well, we're going to change it so that that's what you're measuring. It's also religion. Paradise Lost starts off with Lucifer having lost a war against God. He awakens, resurrects in hell, realizing where he is, and sees all his dead comrades around him. Comrades was a bad choice. I'm not trying to imply socialism or communism. His friends, his peers around him. His friends. And he wakes his closest advisors and asks them what he should do. And one of them says, you should build your palace down here. We don't need God. Let's forget about him. Another one says, no, we should go war against God forever. And the third one says, we should just pick at God and continually mess up his plans. And Lucifer flies off to try to decide what he wants. And let me add that at the beginning, the metaphor that's used for what Lucifer did is as if he were chained by God's will, and that merely by exerting his will, the chains broke. It wasn't as if he had to break them. It was as if merely by wanting his own will, the chains were broken. It was free will that freed him. By choosing to be free, he was free. And that itself was the war against God. And that's kind of the metaphor of Adam and Eve. I'm going to put this tree here. Your will may be to take the apple, but I'm telling you not to. You have to supplant your will with mine. And there's a million questions that come up about scientifically whether free will exists, but also whether this free will map that God allegedly has created for mankind on the Bible makes any sense, which I don't think it does, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I don't think most people would choose it when faced with this decision. And I think that the perfect, not perfect, there's a bunch of different ways to put it, but when Lucifer goes off on his own to decide what he's going to do, he contemplates it. And ultimately, when he decides what he wants to do, he decides that he has this, he basically thinks, I could create, if I had the power, I could create a world better than what God does. I could create a world where everybody was happy. I could create a world where everybody was kind. How cruel to create something that wants free will in order to then tell it it's not allowed to exert it. What's the point? It's better if the only thing that makes me less than God is that he's more powerful, then F him. I would rather have free will than submit to something like that. I would rather never see heaven again, having tasted it and knowing what it means, and instead live in eternal flame, eternal torment, than to have to suffer under that creator. And he says specifically, Lucifer, farthest from him is best, whom reason hath equaled, force hath made supreme above his equals. Farewell, happy fields where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors. Hail, infernal world. And thou, profoundest hell, talking about his own mind, and thou, profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I be still what I am and what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater? Here at least we may be free. The Almighty hath not made this place for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and by my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And it's not meant to be I understand, I think I understand that when believers hear that, it sounds like ignorant denial of something that loves you and wants to care for you. Why would you reject that? And let me paint a picture I don't have a belief in a deity. Let me paint a picture for the metaphor that I see in this. God creates mankind. God gives them free will. And then tells them, if you believe in a hell, tells them, if you don't refuse to follow your free will, then you'll burn for eternity. Or, following the Catholics, you'll have some kind of temporary burning or in-between place that you'll go to. Or if you don't believe in hell, then you're just poof, non-existent. Well, then what's the difference between what I think happens when you die? If God is all-powerful, he can do anything. If God is all-knowing and knows everything, in the past and in the future, nothing is hidden from him, then before he even created the first human, he knew what they were going to do. Which means that every person that goes to hell, he knew before they were ever born they were going to hell. Now, that's one way to approach it, that God's all-powerful, all-knowing. All right, what if he's not? What are we worshiping him for? And even if he is all-powerful and all-knowing, and you remove this idea that he already knows where we're going, is that a good enough reason to worship him? He's a fascist dictator. He's got all the army behind him. He's got all the NSA behind him. He watches every move you do and has complete control over you. Is that enough to do whatever he tells you? It's like a father that beats his children. The world gives us horrors. If God created the world and knows what the world's going to do, and that's absent free will, that's regardless of free will, hurricanes, earthquakes, is God doing that intentionally? That seems cruel. Okay, so remove the cruelty. let's just imagine that, I don't need to go, I'm beating a dead horse here. Either God knows what's going to happen and he's cruel, or he has no idea what's going to happen and he's ignorant and apathetic to our pain. Farthest from him is best. And when he says better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, what he's saying is, I would rather suffer my own consequences and be the person I want to be than just be a drone to some innocuous thing that claims dominion over me merely for having either merely for having created me, or because he's all powerful, under the promise of a better future that we will never see until we're dead. And if it's not true, we will never know that it's not true. There has never been a recorded event, and people who believe in it will say I'm wrong, but there's nobody coming back from the dead to tell us that there's an afterlife. The people claim that they have. Jesus claimed that he had. It's not happening. Nobody's coming back from the dead to say, if the after-death experiences are completely subjective, and if you ask people of different faiths, how ironic that it's always the faith of the person